So I was going to review Marvel's Spider-Man 2 before I reviewed this show, but then I was like,
whatever.
alright, I apologize in advance, but allow me to gush over this series for a few minutes. I f***ing love Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and I mean all of it. From the comics, the movie, and the video game, I have read it, watched it, and played it. For those of you who have watched my Bomb Rush Cyberpunk review, I feel like me saying I love Scott Pilgrim vs. the World sounds like the most obvious shit, because even though Jet Set Radio and Scott Pilgrim both have very different styles, I feel like they both have the same fan base, which is basically hipsters who grew up in the early 2000s. So like the hipster I am, when Netflix announced that we were finally getting a Scott Pilgrim anime with all the original cast of the movie reprising their roles, I had already failed No Nut November at that point. So Scott Pilgrim Takes Off came out like a few days ago, and the anticipation I had for this show was on the level of a drug addict waiting for his dealer to restock. I waited day and night, refreshing Netflix until the moment finally arrived. But now that the day has passed, I can honestly say that this anime was not the journey I expected, but it was an amazing journey nonetheless. If you are coming into this anime expecting it to be a complete retelling of the comic books, I'ma just stop you right there. While there are some moments in the comic books that are animated in this show, this anime is a completely new story. Now this will be a slight spoiler, but you'll find out very quickly after episode 1. If you're expecting a lot of Scott and Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, then you might be a little disappointed. Ramona Flowers is the true main character of this anime, and because of this choice, I feel like some people might be turned off by the fact that Scott Pilgrim is sort of sidelined in his own show, but the reason this didn't bother me personally was because this choice gave the characters who barely had much development in the other adaptations so much more development. I did not expect this show to give so much more character development to the evil exes, but I am so glad they went this direction. And honestly, I am so glad that Knives isn't obsessed with Scott in this show, and she develops more into her own character. I can understand why some people might be upset with this direction because they probably wanted the adaptation to be completely faithful to the comics. But as someone who wanted a new Scott Pilgrim story anyway, I was absolutely happy that they gave us something new. Because as much as I would have loved the entire comic book series to finally get animated, I've read them multiple times already. So the fact that I didn't know where the plot was going to go in this anime honestly made me more excited rather than disappointed. And that being said, even if the story was bad, the two things I was confident they would pull off well in this adaptation was the animation and the soundtrack. And I was 100% right. The soundtrack is a banger, with some familiar songs and new songs created for the anime. And the animation took what the live action did and bumped that shit to 11, especially with the fight scenes. The fight scenes in this show are ridiculously good, with my favorite fight being Ramona versus Roxy. There are certain things in animation that you can't pull off in live action, and you can tell that this studio used that to their advantage and pulled off so many creative visuals that made the fights even better in the process. I don't know if we will ever get a season 2 of this show, but God, I want a season 2 of this show. If we don't get one, I'm satisfied regardless, but for how many plot threads they added to this show, there are so many directions they could take with this show with a season 2. And hopefully they give us more Scott Pilgrim this time around, and Lisa. But with all that said, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off gave us some banger soundtracks, amazing character development, and phenomenal animation. Whether you're a fan of Scott Pilgrim or not, I 100% believe that you will find some enjoyment from this adaptation. If you have never seen anything Scott Pilgrim in your life, this show is the perfect gateway drug. So with all that said, my final verdict for Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is the golden seal of approval.